Okay, and the last item for us to deal with in the open agenda is item 39, Ōtautahi Christchurch Recovery Plan. Right, so sorry, I didn't, Dawn, I didn't talk to you beforehand. Are you going to present this or just take it as read and ask questions? So you're going to make an opening statement?
Just an opening statement.
Okay,
that's
cool.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and members. You have been briefed on the Ōtautahi Christchurch Recovery Plan in at least 2 sessions, if not 3, actually, thinking about it. So I'm really delighted to be here today with the wider team. So every time you see us, there's a few more coming into the fold, which is really, really good to be here. But this builds on the back of the Mayor's paper of the 25th of June, and we absolutely, as the collective team, and you all know Joanna, Paul and Ivan, are here to present this report and answer any questions. But I want to just recognise who we have with us behind as well, because we have Diane McDermott, who is the permanent regional commissioner for MSD, so she's just recently appointed then, isn't it? Yvonne Curry, I'm sure you all know Yvonne as a General Manager for Population and Public Health at the CDHB, and of course Leanne Watson, our Chief Exec from the Canterbury Chamber of Commerce. We're here to basically get agreement that it is our elected members who are providing the cohesive leadership and overarching governance in partnership with Mana Whenua for our citywide recovery and repositioning efforts. And that's what this report is fundamentally about. And we recognise that historically and in the initial period we've been concentrating on the economic piece, but this fundamentally brings forward the social underpinning that must work with it. So we are also seeking your approval of the scope for the plan, approval for agreeing the monitoring framework as outlined in the paper, knowing that that will adapt over time as we get more sophisticated in our monitoring and our ability to be able to count things that matter, and for agreement for that particular monitoring framework. And we will bring forward a quarterly dashboard on that basis. It's not as if we haven't been doing things, but this formalises it and puts it in a way that you can see on a regular basis and will enable us to speak to the wider city and to our partners. Any questions you may have, the far more intelligent people on my right will be answering them.
Right, Tim and then Jimmy.
Look, I met with Ivan just to go over a couple of things the other day, so thank you very much for your time, Ivan. I really appreciate that. I think this is a great bit of work and really appreciate the work that's done. So, has anyone moved or seconded it? Because if you
can move it.
I'm quite happy to move it. Thank you.
Good, and Sarah would like to second it. So, Jimmy, question?
Only on page 8, particularly regarding to the action plan. Past Monday, I chaired the Multicultural Committee meeting, and a moment under the informed group, they have a subgroup, particularly emphasize the multicultural community, and the kind of the how to improve their employment, and also through those training, etc. But their group invited quite a few the government agency and also the NGO, etc. But they particularly emphasize that they invited the, because this one is a little bit close with the labor market transition. That's a Christchurch NZ, you know, you take a lead. But you're not representative in that group. Actually, I'm particularly concerned. We have discussion, all the committee councillors. There's the resources overlap, clash, you know, how to work in together. And also those the group, informed group, they've been established almost 30 years. So I just want to recommend, you know, whether the Christchurch NZ can take a positive way, also engage with the subgroup of informed group. Yes.
Look, I think that's an excellent suggestion. We certainly do interact with a number of community groups that support ethnic communities, as does MSD, and Diane's team work particularly closely with those groups to ensure that we are transitioning people into the workforce where possible and making sure they have access to all of the training opportunities to support that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, thanks, team, for pulling this together. And I always raise this, Joe, and it's something I struggle with, is how are we going to measure the tangible outcomes from this? So can you give me a sense of how that is? And then maybe for you, Dawn, obviously the council plays a role in terms of the $1 billion we have a year that $750 that we spend in the city. Mm-hmm. So where on here does that sit in terms of how we're going to effectively deliver it to the city? So can you guys give me a feel for that?
Do you want to go?
Yeah, so in terms of the monitoring framework, as the paper outlines, we'll be reporting quarterly against the metrics that are within both the economic indicators and social indicators. So you'll have a very clear idea of how we're benchmarking against the rest of the country, the national average and other metropolitan centres. We will also be publishing that data monthly so that we have an idea between the quarters how we're progressing, because it's really important that we're able to respond quickly. And then at a project level, we'll be reporting against projects that are within the 7 streams from within our organisations. So for instance, Christchurch NZ reports quarterly against all of our project activity, and we'll continue to do that. Now the difference that this plan delivers is that all of that project activity will be organised against the priorities of the recovery plan, so you can see how it fits into that overall context. So both at a program level and a project level, you'll be able to have visibility over our success or otherwise in terms of responding to recovery.
So a year on from now, what will and maybe I've missed it, but what are the tangible things we can sit here and say, actually Christchurch NZ or the team have delivered?
Yeah.
So that's the bit I'm sort of missing.
Yeah, so in terms of our performance against the indicators, it's our ambition that we outperform the national average, so that our recovery is faster and more detailed than is occurring at a national level. But Sam, it's really difficult at this point in time because of the dynamic situation with respect to COVID to put a measure, an actual number in this, because the situation is continuing to change with respect to the economy. But it is our ambition that we outperform the national average.
So is this more of a monitoring approach than a delivery approach?
No, it very much focused on action and delivery and ensuring that we are outperforming national performance.
So how do we deliver it if we don't know what our goal is?
Well, our goal is to outperform the national average, and we will know that on a monthly basis.
But we don't. Wow. Okay.
So if you 3.21 actually lists the work streams. So in answer to the specific question you asked of me and the very significant spend that this council puts into the market, that would fall under the productive infrastructure, which would be ourselves and Christchurch NZ. Now, you, I'm sure, are very aware that we have a comprehensive procurement strategy that fundamentally links to outcomes, and we've been working on that and adopted it in this last year, and we're actually working about how we can make that even stronger. So that would relate to employability, it would relate to sustainability, it would relate obviously to best value, it relates to where we get within our own purchasing within our own area, so within Christchurch and then wider Christchurch and then New Zealand and outside of that. So we have a number of levers that we can utilise, and we will be able to show that in our numbers in this work.
This is a recovery strategy for Ōtautahi Christchurch. It's not for Christchurch City Council activities or Christchurch NZ activities, and I think that's the key, the partnerships and relationships with MSD and with health and the DHB, and it's all of those different aspects. So we've got a number of other people lined up here for that purpose, to sort of indicate that level of and extent of partnership, which is why the Chamber's such a core critical one in terms of the business-led recovery in the city. So it's not the council doing or Christchurch NZ doing, it's actually how do you generate the action so that it is done.
So are we not doing?
Not,
is it what? Well, you've just said we're not
yes
doing.
And no. It's yes and no. There are activities that we will coordinate and bring together as a city. I'm sick to death of talking about bloody silos in this council, let alone the silos that exist between different agencies. If we are to actually have a sort of deep and quick recovery, then we do actually have to work in a collaborative mindset and not within the individual silos of our organisations. But yeah.
If I can answer, I really understand what you're getting at, Sam, and I absolutely agree with you that we need to be measuring progress. To clarify the point around the performance against national average, we don't know what the national average will be at any given time, which is why we've developed the monitoring framework and a commitment to monitor monthly and report quarterly. But your question around action is really important, and what this delivers is a guide for action. There'll be action that my organisation will deliver within that Paul's, that the Christchurch City Council through Dawn and the rest of the team will deliver. There will also be action that Diane and Yvonne and Leanne's teams will be delivering within this guide to action. So you're absolutely right. This is about action and not just about monitoring. And there is action sitting within all of our responsibilities.
Yeah, I think, Sam, if you think about, just take an example of something that's in the appendix, I think, to the paper, is around the work that the airport led with Ministry of Transport around the freight hub. Mm-hmm. And so that was tangible action, that the airport put their hand up, went to the Ministry of Transport and worked out how to get the freight activity in and out of the South Island that we needed to start recovering quickly. So that was entirely consistent with some of the indicators that you'll see here in terms of business or economic activity that effectively are facilitated by and enabled by the work that, in this case, the Ministry of Transport and Christchurch Airport did. In other areas, there's going to be other agencies and other organisations that need to be involved in facilitating and enabling positive performance against the indicators that are set out in the monitoring framework. So it's an enabling and facilitating approach to deliver positive outcomes when you start monitoring how we're performing relative to other cities. That's how I've been thinking about it. Because I understand, like Joe, I understand your question exactly. Because we don't want this to be just a monitoring framework or a document that sits on a shelf. It's got to lead to tangible outcomes. I agree.
Yeah.
So it's going to be two more examples literally live this week. So I've had 2 meetings with 2 private sector companies, both of whom are very, very interested because obviously they understand the requirements in terms of our procurement policy. They want to know how they can make that live. And I'm having detailed discussions about how we can do that from people furthest away from the labour market. This framework makes it so much easier that I'm with my partner to say, right, if we develop that right, both in the supply chain and the subbies, we can be working with MSD to get the pipeline of people within our area to actually start to get employment. So, you know, it's real and it's live, and this is the relationship that's helping us do that.
So I guess...
Sorry, Sam, if I can just add to that briefly. The other aspect that I think will be important for governors in terms of decision making, so how do you approve allocation of funding and resources with the expectation of outcomes, is that with the monitoring framework, which is just one part of the paper that's in front of you, it enables an understanding of areas that are perhaps impacted disproportionately by COVID-19, which organisations can then determine how to collectively respond to, with an expectation of the impact or the outcomes that that investment and that allocation of effort should achieve in relation to the framework that you have. So if you know where your performance is currently at as a city, and as governors you can decide about how you want to prioritise allocation and effort of resources and funding, it should be on the basis of achieving a particular output or outcome that can then be demonstrated through the monitoring framework.
Okay, and just one more question if I can. So just in terms of those work streams, where would be, if someone out in the public at the moment is looking at that, we would be the one that looks at how we make the council easier to deal with in terms of development and the like. And I don't say that, you know, facetiously, but it's just a,
Yeah.
I mean, it's all being reported to us, but shouldn't we have a work stream which says, hey, we want to break down the barriers, we want to... So is that in there, or am I missing it?
I'm not sure it necessarily needs to be a work stream. I think it would be an overriding principle that must run through all of this. And it's not just the council being easy to work with, it's every single agency being easy to work with, easier to work with.
Don't we have direct... It feels like that's something we have direct control over.
Yes,
and
it
it's being
is.
fed up to us, so why wouldn't that be?
Why it's a performance measure for our chief executive.
That's
Yeah,
not to
but-
change our organisation. I think that's the job I'm employed to do anyway.
All right, I'll just leave it.
Oh, no, I'd like to answer that if you don't mind, Sam. There are two parts to being business friendly. One is being business friendly and enabling business with the right supporting regulations, and the other, of course, is being attractive and investor friendly. So to answer your question specifically, it sits in two work streams. The first is the smart sustainable city, so that's being the type of city that people want to invest in and have the right investment opportunities, and then confident city, presenting ourselves as an attractive proposition with the right enabling environment. So, yeah.
Right. You've earned your pay today. Thanks
Thank
very
you
much.
very much.
Melanie.
I've just got some questions around the indicators, and there's three different ones I'm sort of looking at. One for business survival. Are there other more direct measures that you can take there? Because consumer and business confidence sounds airy-fairy to me.
Yeah, okay. So we have measures within specific projects. So for instance, within the Regional Business Partners program that we administer alongside the Chamber, we've got very detailed KPIs in terms of the number of businesses we need to serve and the amount of funding that we need to allocate. If we were to bring those types of measures, which are very granular but very important, up to a program level, you would start to see a dashboard that was just unworkable with far too much data within it. But we are monitoring at a project level some of that type of activity.
But could you do something as a summary, like 2,000 businesses fell over and 5,000 got created or something? You know.
We certainly could, and I think as we produce the quarterly dashboard, there will be commentary. So where we start to see alarming or notable indicators at a project level, then we would include that in the commentary as opposed to specifically within the dashboard.
Okay. What was this one? With safety and security as well, I thought there were other measures that you could have too. So is that sort of in the same kind of... Like there's lots of other aspects to safety and security than the two that are indicated there.
So there's two aspects to this, I suppose, just to touch on. The first is the Christchurch City Council will organise for information to be collected from a range of different sources. And what we've given you in terms of the paper is a high-level overview of some of the key indicators. From that, there will be a small group of representatives across some of the agencies. So I'm not sure whether there are particular safety and security aspects that you're thinking of, but the likes of, for example, Oranga Tamariki, MSD, Community and Public Health, will be involved in providing recommendation around which of the key indicators go forward into the dashboard, because we're starting to see trends that are starting to come through, or we've seen significant changes perhaps in some of the underlying data that comes through, along with some of the commentary to help to explain what the data is telling us and what we could anticipate over the next 6, 12 and 18 months. So in short answer to your question, there's a broad range. The indicators that we've provided to you here are more of the key indicators. Sitting underneath that, there are many, many indicators that can and will be considered. It's a matter of how we make sense of those and present them in a way that provides you with an overall understanding of what the impact is.
Yeah. And just, sorry, one more. With loneliness, how does that get measured?
Yeah, so that's a subjective measure, which is undertaken through surveying of local residents.
Right, okay.
And it's a self-reported measure on a scale.
Okay.
Jimmy?
Thank you. One more question. Regarding to economic indicators, the travel, I remember last time the presentation, the people all mentioned you would like to to more integrate the airport and also the Littleton port, particularly regarding to those number of passengers. My understanding, even the airport, they have a target year by year. So it's like the year before, the target 7 million people arrive in Christchurch in the airport. But after maybe the COVID-19 or maybe some kind of most attack, those ones impact. Whether we still have this indicator and where we have setting up a goal year by year.
Yeah, no, I understand your question, and it's embedded there under the travel indicators in terms of visitor arrivals, which is obviously a component of passengers through the airport each year. And so, like a number of these measures, there's levels of detail that sit underneath the key performance indicators that would supplement the actual dashboard stats that you're going to be seeing on a quarterly basis. But yeah, absolutely, that's being monitored and measured, and will continue.
Also cover the vehicle.
Yeah, from a cruise berth point of view, absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's not just aeroplanes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Aaron?
Yeah, got some questions. The first one is the question I asked the last couple of times around GDP numbers and us being such a poor performer as the main centre. Do we know why yet and how we change that? Because your measurabilities, you said before, Joe, and Sam's question around will do better than others. If our baseline is purely GDP, that shouldn't be hard if you start at the bottom. We should be able to overtake someone. And or are we looking to lift everything?
With respect to GDP, I'll give the same answer I gave last time, which is our proportion of GDP has been falling relative to the rest of the country, which partly reflects the fact that we're coming off the rebuild stimulus, and we have been aware of that problem since 2016 rather. It is an ongoing area that we need to see improvement, which is why we need to transform the economy and start to focus on the sectors where there's the greatest opportunity for growth. That fits within the Smart Sustainable City stream, which is all about developing the sectors and clusters of industry where there is the greatest opportunity for growth. But there's also a productivity issue within the Canterbury economy, and that sits within the business survival and business growth stream, and the work that we do in partnership with the Chamber is absolutely essential to growing the performance of individual businesses, and then in turn the number of employees that they're able to employ. So it's a problem that is known to us, it's been known to us for some time.
Yeah, productivity is a big issue.
Big issue.
And quite a big one is, for me, is, and it's not in here under the levers that you're using, and that's holding the government to account. And like there's they were called shovel ready, but it's shovel eventually. I've changed it to projects, because they were meant to be shovels in the ground when you could go back to work. Everyone's back at work and no shovels have hit the ground, and that doesn't stimulate an economy. It will keep the economy going longer term, but most of them are projects that were going to happen. A lot of them are one-time spends. They're not going to create long-term employment, and they're hardly the Hoover Dam. So who's holding that? Well, that's the famous one of the 20th century. Who's holding the government to account? Because it doesn't say in here who's going to do that.
It's next Saturday. That's next Saturday's agenda. It's not today.
What's that?
Oh, it's true. It's not really a question for staff to answer.
But shouldn't that be in here? I mean, you got, because, and it leads into my next question. I had someone in the public ask me if, because they don't look to the council for any economic drivers in their business, but they said if the council didn't do this, what would change? What would happen to Canterbury if this didn't happen? Would the economy be exactly the same? Would it be better? Would it be worse? Like that was a genuine question. I don't think they were being facetious. I think they said, like, what are the measurable outcomes and how, and you did say before that we will do better.
If I could give you a tangible example, I think we survey alongside the Chamber the businesses who we support through our business growth and business support services, and we have one of the greatest, the highest performances in the country in terms of the satisfaction that businesses indicate based on the service that we provide. And we specifically ask them if our intervention has helped the performance of their business, and they say it has. So this year that's 3,500 businesses who have received support that they value through the intervention that we've been able to offer. And in addition to that, there's another 11,000 businesses who have sought help through the helpline, which is administered by the Chamber, and that we support and promote. So I think the answer is we don't know what would happen if we didn't do what we do, because that's not a scenario we're able to model, but we know that it is valued by our partners.
Right, and if we are doing this here in Christchurch / a bit of Canterbury, but it's mainly Christchurch focused, and you say in the measurables we will be better off than the other centres, any other centres doing these plans?
Better than the national average was.
Better than the average
Better
national
than the
average.
national average, yeah.
Yeah. So are others doing this or not doing this? How many? Do we know?
I don't know the number of others. There are other TLAs who are planning for recovery. Some plans have a reasonable level of sophistication and others have a lesser level of sophistication. We're very pleased that we were able to go out early because we understand recovery in Christchurch, and so we are very proud of the work that we are doing here, and I think that members should also be proud of that against the national context.
Okay, so my last question would be around unemployment. How will our numbers stack up against everyone else's? Because for me, jobs are really important to people and important to mental health and important to the entire economy. What will our number be versus everyone else's? It will be the measure I'll be holding this paper to going forward, because it's a recovery or it's a loss. But do we have a number in mind versus everyone else?
Well, it's a collaborative picture, isn't it? Because, I mean, perhaps if, sorry, I can't.
I mean, because we have to look
remember.
people in the eye, and when we've done a recovery plan, and when someone comes up and says, my son no longer has a job, hasn't had one for 6 months, what are you doing about the economy? And I'll say,
All we can.
Sorry, I just was conferring
Yeah,
with
sorry.
our colleague at USD. We are obviously looking at our performance relative to other regions, and the discussion we were just having is that it is obviously possible to report on that, and we've got that within our economic indicators. So we'll make sure that we prioritise specifically reporting back against the national average with respect to job seeker numbers and other benefit numbers.
yeah, and just straight out employment versus non-employment,
That's
partial
right.
employment.
Yep,
And if we do that
participation,
from looking
activity
back
rates.
on where Christchurch was versus them a year ago, or 5 years ago,
Yeah.
and then going forward would be good.
Such a great point, Erin, and that's why we've also got other indicators, which, because the job seeker allowance is only one part of the picture, obviously, because not
Yep.
everybody is eligible for the job seeker
Yeah,
allowance. Yeah, it's a great point.
So the other reflection I would make as well is the alternative is actually we don't partner to drive some different outcomes, and we just sit in isolation as individual institutions just doing whatever it is we do. The consequence of that, in my view and my experience, would be that the citizens of Christchurch would be not getting the best service, and they would be in a poorer position than trying to do what it is we're trying to do, which is collective effort to make an impact. So you've got to weigh it up against the opportunity to try and drive and make a difference versus sitting here in isolation and not doing anything. And I don't think that that's what the local authority should be doing.
Yeah, I think there was an interesting point in here in relation to mana whenua, because in a way it sort of picks up on that. Obviously there's, the timing has stretched their capacity to engage, but they want to be thoroughly engaged, but they've actually picked up that their focus will be on specific operational projects within the recovery plan that support development of the Māori economy, Māori business and skills pathways for rangatahi. So again, it's just recognising that it's a collaborative story. It's not one agency doing the doing, it's a collective effort, and then reporting against the collective ambition rather than us all separating off into our individual silos and expecting something to change. I think somebody had a definition of madness that
That's called
associated
Einstein's
with
definition
that.
of insanity.
Yeah.
Had it on my wall
Yanni
at my last
and
job.
Anne.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on some of the points that have been made. So one of the questions I have, and thank you, you've given me some of the budget attached to some of the programs, but they seem to be things that central government is putting money into, and I'm not quite sure. Like if you take like the pupil pathways, we're putting 60k in. You take the student quarantine. You take there's some other ones I think around job training, it seems to me very unclear why we're putting money into things that government have agreed to fund. And also, actually, if you take like the whole training, education and employment pathway programs, there seems like 4 or 5 different work streams rather than kind of one single destination where anyone can go and get the help and be put in the right direction. So I'm just really interested in that. I know that I've actually heard that we are actually eligible for that money as a council for the money that the government made available for East Christchurch. But I just don't, it's a bit like the comments that have been made before. I don't really see the kind of specific outcome that we're trying to achieve from here. So I just wondered if you had any reflection on why we're contributing to things that central government are funding, but also whether or not there's a more holistic approach that we could do to kind of be a point of one-stop shop kind of, rather than have a myriad of different agencies involved. That was the first question.
So with respect to the central government funding question, which is a really important one, we would never look to duplicate activity that was being funded elsewhere. Often central government funding into particular programs is contingent on local funding, and often an investment from the local government will be matched or significantly enhanced by central government funding. But certainly your point is a very good one. We should never invest where it duplicates activity elsewhere. In relation to the pupil pathways specifically, that was a program where our investment was able to amplify the outcomes and lead to a further expansion of the program, and we're co-investing alongside the University of Canterbury on that one.
Isn't government putting money in for people to train?
So that particular program is supporting young Māori and Pacifica to consider STEM careers. So it's a specific initiative designed to achieve an outcome based on an insight that young people, young Māori in particular, were not moving or self-selecting STEM. So it's an educational awareness program that was identified as necessary within 2 local high schools.
But what's all the money that government's made available? The 120 million for rangatahi in East Christchurch? Is none of that?
So that's designed for use by community groups.
Well, it's the same thing. Like, isn't it the same thing? Like, why? Yeah, I still don't quite understand. Like, we would pay for something that government's putting money into. Like, it's really strange to me. Anyway. But.
Yanni, I think your point is a really valid one in terms of understanding how the collective effort is being applied, whether it's central government funding, local government funding, NGOs or mana whenua. One of the challenges that we have at the moment, that we've had for some time, as we've talked about repeatedly here today, is that there have been organisational responses and approaches that have been developed to solve particular problems, rather than a wider effort across a range of organisations to determine how those limited resources can best be applied. What we're proposing here provides an opportunity for central government, local government, NGOs and others to understand how those efforts can be applied in a more efficient and coordinated way. So if we take a program level approach and we're looking at work streams and we have an understanding of the different initiatives and activities that are being applied against some of those, it is highly possible that we will identify some existing areas of duplication and or gaps. But if we don't change the approach that we're taking, that will continue to occur and we won't get any better at doing things differently. So we need to take an approach where we have a greater understanding of the whole, not just the council's contribution to that, but we invite our partners that we have here today to also provide a greater level of cohesion around what we're each contributing. That will help us to ensure that we're not duplicating, we're funding in the right areas, and we are leveraging and augmenting private sector investment, central government investment, and local community effort.
All right, because I mean, and I've fed this in. Like, if you take the building financial capability, we reference the MSD putting in like 65k, but councils put more money in than that.
Yep.
And we don't seem to have any clear picture of where the need is or any strategic work around actually government's funding it. Why would we fund it? Or actually, here's the gaps in the areas of the city where the provision doesn't exist.
So the monitoring framework helps us to understand where the need is, which then enables interagency conversations to discuss who is best placed to respond.
So what you're describing is exactly the things we're trying to solve.
Right. Okay. So I guess it's about the point that Aaron and Sam have made is when are we going to get to that point where we can actually see what the problem is and what we're trying to achieve, so that we can measure it. You know, if you take things like unemployment rates, in certain parts of our city or for certain demographics, I think, the response we've had initially has been we don't have that granular data, so we don't know.
Yep. So if the council decides to approve the monitoring framework, the recs that are in the paper are seeking leadership and governance from the council, agreement to the monitoring framework, noting that it will change and it will evolve and be enhanced, because what this is likely to do is raise further questions, which we'll dig deeper into, and also to approve for the council to produce a monthly dashboard, which helps you as council laws to understand where the need is, what the trends are, what some of the emerging issues are, and to hold to account other agencies in terms of what they are doing to respond to those. So again, we're trying to respond to the problems that we all are aware of. What we need is your approval to actually start doing some of those things to bring them forward to you.
Thank you. Two other questions. One is, in the Central City Regeneration Review, it came out really clearly that the creative economy was a really important part, and it also said that the current state assessment demonstrated little evidence that decisions are made knowing how they will leverage the creative economy as part of accelerating outcomes across the Central City. And when I read through the kind of plan that we've got, and I didn't feed this in earlier, but I know other councils have raised it, when you look at things like shovel-ready funding, there doesn't seem to be any priority or thought given to the creative sector and the role that can play, even though that could have a really amazing impact. So I just wondered whether there was any work happening in that space, if there was anything more that we could do, given that we talk about innovation and entrepreneurship. We're putting a lot of money into that, but that seems quite different to the creative sector.
I'm not sure I absolutely agree that there isn't innovation and entrepreneurship in the creative sector. I think they're probably some of the most innovative and creative people.
But
I think what
we're
Yanni's
funding,
saying
like,
is that in the
startups,
social
business startups
indicators, in the social indicators and
just
economic
doesn't-
indicators, so it sits in the between. It is that whole creative energy.
Yeah, I mean, what we've got, the program we've got is coordination and investment into intensive support for high growth potential startup and scale up businesses. I guess I was more thinking, if you contrast it, what I understand the impact of a film studio would be in the city versus maybe a stretch of road that gets upgraded or possibly a cycleway. If you looked at the jobs created, how do you balance what gets the investment?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of gaps with the focus on business survival and the labour market. It's kind of like existing businesses and employment, whereas there's a whole entrepreneurial and the creative connection. They're two parts of the same thing. That sort of they sit in the middle. Because it's encouraging, and the particular sectors, and that I hate the word super nodes, but there you go, I've used it, but all of those speak to that entrepreneurship and creativity aspect of them as we develop industries that are connected with our past but actually represent very much our future. So
this is a really difficult one. It's like the tech sector. Creative economies sit within a number of economies, and as you've outlined, they sit inherently deeply within our innovation and entrepreneurship ecosystem, and we've deliberately designed that system so that it's joined up, so that it staircases people from start-up to scale-up within our individual incubators, and we've got aspirations to grow that further. But there are some specific sectors, and Screen is one that you have rightly identified, and we're putting a great deal of thought into currently, that we can do a lot more detailed and focused work on. So when we come back to you to talk to you about the long-term planning process, we will be having a conversation around where Screen sits within our economy and within our creative economy specifically. And then the other point I'll make, so that's two direct initiatives to support the creative economies, is we have the Toi Ōtautahi art strategy, Christchurch art strategy, which again is a really important contributor to our cityscape, and we need to be considering the priorities within that strategy as well, and particularly as we promote the city, we attract events, the multi-use arena conversation that you've just had is part of all of that. So I appreciate that's a long answer to what was quite a short question, but really that creative economies piece sits across in the same way our tech economy sits across a number of sectors.
I guess I was asking sort of at a higher level, if we're investing $45 million in a new airport, or we're investing X amount in cycleways.
Yanni, this is the recovery strategy.
Yeah, no, I get that. So
no,
for recovery
seriously,
for
I
jobs,
just
for jobs, which
it
is
is
what?
now 2:15, and I really would like us to kind of focus on other elements. And I think there's good feedback that's going here. This is a living and breathing document. It's not. We don't
Yeah,
sign off today and
get
then
that.
it's the end of the matter. It's
All I was trying to say is when we're prioritising things like budgets and decision making around what's going to have the greatest
which
impact
is what we're going to do
help
for the
people,
LTP. We'll get there.
It would be good to understand how those trade-offs are being made, and
We will definitely want to know that. Anne, last question.
Probably follows on a bit. Just the 3.28 ongoing engagement, critical that we, local communities affected by COVID are enabled and supported. So I'm just wondering, just to clarify, so OCRP wouldn't have direct contact with those people, but direct contact with the agencies that we would be dealing with those people. Is that how you see it working? So I'm thinking of a young, Indian guy that's looking for a job. How would he know where to go to, and who would he go to, and how would this help in this situation?
Yeah, great question.
Yeah.
So I guess the starting point for us was being mindful that there has been a lot of, and is currently, community engagement that's occurring.
Yeah.
And one of the many things that frustrates communities is when you ask them multiple times the same sorts of questions.
Yeah.
What can we do for you? So we're looking to leverage off the Strengthening Communities Strategy refresh, which has just occurred, the Greater Christchurch 2050 engagement, which is occurring at the moment, to understand at a community level what is occurring and where might there be concentrations of impact. In terms of individuals and how they respond, services, and we have some of the regional executives for various services with us today, can then gear their services and target more towards, based on our understanding of whether there are geographical concentrations, whether there are ethnic communities or communities of interest.
Right.
So it's really about knowing where the impact is occurring, so that collectively we can think about how best to apply our services. We're not anticipating at this stage that the engagement would be broad level engagement with a community that has been affected, that at this stage is relatively hard to define and identify. But it's more about how we target our actions and the services that we provide to those individuals, collectively across the whole.
Yeah. So I just want to do an analogy. When we talk about our companies, we talk about the family, don't we? Well, this is another branch of the family, as I see it. This is a network of relationships to ensure that we're putting our information, our evidence to get the biggest impact, and knowing what each other is thinking about or is actually doing, and how we can lever off that, might be in 2s, 3s, 9, whatever it might be, to get even better outcomes. That's it's a relationship piece more than anything else.
So I think engagement's probably the wrong word. Probably more connections. How does the ordinary, everyday person connect with what you're, going to be, or what this is going to be offering? How's the pathway? Where do they start, and all that stuff? Is that's the agency's job, isn't it? Rather than you're connecting those
With
together.
a glue.
Yeah, got it. Okay, thanks.
Right, it's been moved and seconded. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's carry on with it.